Okay, everybody's ready. So, gravity distorts the invisible fabric of space-time. That's the whole basis of Dr. Humphrey's model. And this is not science fiction, this is science fact. It's something that was predicted by Einstein's general theory of relativity and has now been experimentally tested and verified many times. When different people run the same experiment, get the same results, then you know you've got real science. When different people run the same experiments, don't get the same results, somebody's fudging somewhere. But basically, the theory of Einstein was that gravity doesn't operate the way Sir Isaac Newton had envisioned it. It's not like an actual force that lays hold of the moon or a satellite and pulls it like a rope in an orbit around a gravitational body. Rather, gravity affects and distorts the invisible fabric of space-time in the vicinity of the object with mass. Now, they usually illustrate this with a two-dimensional grid. It's actually a three-dimensional effect, but they use a two-dimensional grid just because it makes it easier to visualize that something with mass puts a dent in the fabric of space-time. It warps it. Now, the Earth doesn't have a lot of mass, so it doesn't warp the vicinity of space, or the invisible fabric of space-time in our vicinity all that much. Not like a neutron star or a black hole would, but it does have enough mass to do it in a measurable way that we can actually measure with extremely accurate clocks like atomic clocks. Now, if we have something with greater mass and density, like a low mass star up here, well, it puts a bigger dent, warping of the fabric of space and time. Something with a very high mass, like a neutron star or a black hole, would cause an enormous warping of the invisible fabric of space-time in its vicinity. Now, what Einstein's theory predicted is that outside this major gravitational influence, time would be running at pretty much the same speed. But as you get closer to the center of mass of a massive object, you come into that warping of the invisible fabric of space-time, and it affects the relative speed of time itself. The closer you get to the center of mass of an object, the greater is the distortion of the fabric of space-time, thus slower the relative speed of time. So lower toward the center of mass is slower. Remember that? Lower is slower, higher is faster. The further away from the center of mass is faster because time is not being slowed down by the effect of gravity warping the fabric of space-time itself. Einstein also predicted that this warping would affect the trajectory of light, that light from stars coming in near a massive object, because of the warping of the invisible fabric of space-time in that vicinity, it would actually deflect the trajectory of the light. And in 1919, the famous British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington, he said, well, we've got a full solar eclipse coming up here in 1919. Einstein published his theory in 1915. He said, let's go ahead and check it out. And that was one of the first experiments to actually check out and prove that they could actually see stars that were actually behind the sun during the solar eclipse, but because of the light bending around the sun, because of this warping of the fabric of space-time, the light bent around it so you could actually see stars that you should not have been able to see unless Einstein's theory was true. And of course, this gravitational lensing effect, as it is called, has been tested and proven many times now. So it is not science fiction. Gravity, as Einstein said, does have an effect on the relative speed of time. That means you can never again ask the simple question, how much time has passed in the universe? Einstein would say, according to whose clock, how much time has passed. See, if you have a clock near a black hole, near its event horizon, that clock, all physical processes, time itself, would run at a significantly slower relative speed than if you're far away from that black hole, outside of that extreme warping of the fabric of space-time. So time is not a universal constant. Gravity affects it, and in the right type of universe, with an edge and a center to it, with enough mass where we'd have that additional mass we need with that water boundary, time could be brought to an absolute standstill for a period of time in the central part of the universe, and then that timeless zone would shrink and shrink as God stretches out the heavens. So the effect of gravity on time can and is routinely measured here on Earth. If you have extremely accurate clocks like atomic clocks, they can measure in microseconds, millionths of a second, nanoseconds, billions of a second, picoseconds, trillions of a second. The newest atomic clocks are using lasers to agitate atoms, and they're called fountain nuclear clocks, and they're supposed to be able to measure something like 100 trillionth of a second to that type of accuracy. It's pretty accurate. But The Earth, like I say, doesn't have enough mass to produce a severe change in the relative speed of time, but it does do it enough to be measurable. If we took an atomic clock and put it like in Greenwich, England, Zulu time, Greenwich time, near sea level, and we compare it with an atomic clock up at Boulder, Colorado, mile high, you're higher above the center of mass of the Earth. The further away you get from the center of a massive object, the less distortion in the fabric of space-time. The more it's distorted, the more time slows down its relative speed. The further higher away you get, there's less distortion, less slowing down. So because it's a mile high, as we measure it for 1 year, we find the atomic clock here at sea level and the atomic clock at a mile high don't keep the same time. You get about 5 microseconds faster time registered on the clock at altitude because it is further out of the distortion of the fabric of space-time by Earth's gravity. If you had a clock down in a mine shaft, many thousands of feet below the surface of the Earth, it would run even slower than the one at sea level, because the closer you get to the center of mass, that's where you have the more gravitational distortion. What about if we have clocks like we have on our GPS satellites, which are maybe 20,000 kilometers up above the Earth, quite a bit up above Earth's mass? Well, then there would be even a bigger measurable difference. And in fact, because what Einstein said is true, we actually can use GPS. How many of you have GPS in your cars, by the way? Anybody? Got a few. Okay. Welcome to the new millennium. Anyway, this would not work if we didn't know about the fact that time runs at different speeds. Because these satellites are up higher above the center of Earth's mass and have less distortion of the fabric of space-time, they run at a relatively faster speed than our clocks do in our cars here at ground level. And if that difference in time were not taken into account, GPS wouldn't even work. So the constellation of satellites orbits the Earth at an altitude of about 20,000 kilometers. At this height, the atomic clocks on board the satellites run faster than the same clocks on Earth by 42 microseconds per day, 42 millionths of a second. However, the difference, in the radio transmissions from the constellation of GPS satellites down to your GPS receiver, that little bit of difference over that distance of transmission can add up to an enormous difference in calculating the correct position on the Earth. So the satellites are traveling at around 12,000 kilometers per hour, which produces an opposing relativistic effect of slowing the clocks down. See, the faster you move, that was Einstein's special theory of relativity, dealing with speed of light and objects in fast motion. Relative to that speed, time slows down. The closer you get to the speed of light, the more time slows down if you're on an object going at that speed. So you have counteracting relativistic effects, the velocity effect and the gravitational effect. So the opposing relativistic effect of slowing the clocks down by about 4 or 5 microseconds per day. The combined effect is that the clocks on the GPS satellites run 38 microseconds per day faster than equivalent Earthbound clocks, literally a difference in the relative speed of time. Why does this matter? If this time difference was ignored and no compensation made, the position errors would build up at a rate of about 400 meters per hour, which would render the system completely useless. In a matter of a few hours, you'd be off by miles. So, this is real. It's something we use in our modern technology. Time dilation, the fact that time can run at different relative speeds, is an observable, proven, useful fact of science. And it is the whole basis of explaining how we could see stars billions of light years away when by Earth's clock, only days had passed. That is not science fiction. If you have the right structure of the universe, it falls right out of Einstein's equations. Now, we've talked about redshift, and you'll notice I repeat things here because there's 3 principles to learning. The first one is repetition, the second one is repetition, and the third one is repetition. So if we repeat some things, it's because some of these things may be a little new and difficult, and we just want to make sure you understand. Redshifts of starlight have to do with the spectral lines that we identify coming from the light source. Those dark lines are the spectral lines, and they will shift either to the left blue side or ultraviolet side, or shift to the red and infrared side, depending on whether or not the object is moving away from you or moving toward you. So, if space was compressing instead of expanding, the electromagnetic wave of light would be compressed also. That shifts it to a shortwave. Shortwave shifts the spectral lines to the blue end of the spectrum. It would be called blue shifted. Something coming toward you would exhibit a blue shift. If it's stretching away from you, though, the electromagnetic wave of light is being stretched out with the stretching of the fabric of space, and this shifts it to the long wave, or red infrared end of the spectrum. This was the thing that gave Edwin Hubble fits. All directions he's looking, he's seeing indication of red-shifted galaxies, indicating they're moving away from us, not toward us, and we're in the center. We're in the center, everything else is expanding away from us. Very special position in the universe. So redshifts are used to describe the expansion of the universe, the distance of a galaxy from the Earth due to the stretching of the light waves. Now, Edwin Hubble at first used what are called Cepheid variable stars to determine great distances. Didn't know about the redshift distance or the eventual Hubble's law of the redshift. But the Cepheid variables, actually, they're called variables because they vary in their brightness, but it's very accurate. In their variation, the brightness is extremely accurate, and because of that, they can be used as kind of standard candles, so to speak. We know the brightness, therefore we can predict how much its brightness would diminish based on how far away it is. And by measuring the decrease in brightness, they can determine relative distance. Well, in doing that, he found out, oh my goodness, there's a Cepheid variable star in Andromeda. Andromeda is not just a little nebula out there. The Cepheid variable indicates that it is over 2 million light years away, a light year being about 5.9 trillion miles. So 2 million times 5.9 trillion is quite a great distance. And so he also noticed with the Cepheid variable distances a correlation, that the distance of the object by the Cepheid variables also corresponded to greater and greater redshift numbers. The more distant the object, the greater the redshift, the higher the redshift number. Thus came to be known the famous Hubble's law of the redshift, that the more redshifted an object is, the higher the redshift number, the further away it is, and the faster it is receding. Now, the redshift interpretation, therefore, is a galaxy that's not that far away, would be only slightly redshifted. One expanding further away would have a greater redshift, a higher redshift number, and a greater distance. And one with an extreme redshift would be very distant and expanding at an even greater speed. So the redshift numbers apparently indicate distance as well. That's very significant because by comparing redshift numbers, we can compare distance of these galaxies, and they turn out to be clustered in discrete distances, coming almost like concentric spherical shells of galaxies expanding out like onion rings from a central galaxy, which happens to be our home galaxy, the Milky Way. Now, the Big Bang model predicts a homogeneous universe. Everything is evenly mixed, everything is homogeneous. But that's not what the redshift numbers show. As far as the clumping of the galaxies at the distances they are, it's not all an even homogeneous spread. Rather, what we actually observe is distinct quanta. Quanta is Greek, it means packages or steps. It's kind of like digital. On a digital gauge, it goes 1, 2, 3. It doesn't go 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4, and then 2, like you do with an analog gauge. It goes in between. It's just 1, 2, 3, distinct steps. So it appears that redshifts follow this type of package by package, step by step approach. At about a little over 3 million year light year interval is predictable. You have a major clustering. Now there are stars in between, but they're not that thick. But you get this major distinct clustering at specific redshift numbers, averaging a little over 3 million light years out and out and out like onion rings. When we compare these numbers three-dimensionally, spherically, they all add up to about the same distance, which means they appear to form concentric spherical shells of galactic clusters like onion rings going out. Our galaxy is like at the center, like the bullseye of these concentric spherical shells. Again, a kind of design that emphasizes our centrality and a kind of design the Big Bang certainly didn't predict. That's why they don't like it. Now, Dr. Russell Humphreys wrote this article, and it's available currently on answersingenesis.org website. Just type in this title on the search engine and you should get it. Our galaxy is the center of the universe, quantized redshift show. And in there he shows that for decades now, the astronomers have been arguing and quibbling over this because the most straightforward indication is concentric spherical shells with our galaxy at the center. This emphasizes our centrality. It's a type of design that the Big Bang doesn't predict, and it shouldn't be there on this balloon surface of the universe the way they envision the universe. No problem at all for the type of universe God describes, more to three-dimensional universe, but on the balloon it wouldn't make sense, and yet that appears to be the case. Now, Edwin Hubble, remember, I'm quoting him again here, he said, It implies, the redshifts imply we have a unique position in the universe. It's unwelcome suppositions. A favored location must be avoided at all costs. I personally think that even back there in the 30s and 40s, he was seeing quantized effects, but it was so repugnant to him, he didn't even want to mention it. So he didn't even use the word center here. He just said a unique position. He couldn't even bring himself to say the center of the universe. That's what he really meant. So he didn't even want to mention it, but in the decades following, nearly 5 decades later, 50 years later, now they're admitting, yeah, that appears to be the case. Here at Tift and Koch in the Astrophysical Journal, 1984, there is now very firm evidence that redshifts of galaxies are quantized. They come at discrete distances, and these distances are the same three-dimensionally, and thus compose spherical shells of clustered galaxies around a central point, which appears to be our Milky Way galaxy. Now, Halton Arp is an evolutionist astronomer. He was for 29 years a staff astronomer at Mount Wilson and Palomar observatories until he got kicked out because he pointed out too many problems with the Big Bang and things like that. He said the fact that measured values of redshifts do not vary continuously, but come in steps, certain preferred values, quanta packages, is so unexpected, in other words, Big Bang didn't predict it at all, that conventional astronomy, which is Big Bang astronomy, has never been able to accept it. No, it doesn't fit their preconceived idea, so they're not going to accept it. In spite of the overwhelming observational evidence. Now remember what we saw at the beginning? Even if all the evidence is against us, we're not going to believe it because naturalism is true with the Big Bang as a naturalistic theory. This appears to exhibit extreme design, purposeful design, emphasizing that we are like at the bullseye of these concentric spherical shells of galaxies. We're at the center of the universe. Now in Sky and Telescope magazine, under the title of Quantized Redshifts, what's going on here is that quantized redshifts just don't fit into this view of the cosmos, meaning the Big Bang model, for they imply concentric shells of galaxies expanding away from a central point, Earth, or Earth's basic position, because our galaxy appears to be at the center and the Earth is part of the Milky Way galaxy. Even though more recent redshift data have supported the notion of quantized redshifts, cosmologists find them undigestible, even pathogenic. In other words, it gives them heartburn and cancer, and they ain't about to swallow it. So no divine foot in the door, no heartburn and cancer caused by a designed cosmos. Napier and Guthrie, writing in the Journal of Astrophysics and Astronomy, they said the redshift distribution has been found to be strongly quantized in the galactocentric frame of reference. What does galactocentric mean? It means a galaxy at the center. Which galaxy? Our home galaxy, the Milky Way. So we're at the center galaxy of this quantized effect. It says the phenomenon is easily seen by eye and apparently cannot be ascribed to statistical artifacts, selection procedures, or flawed reduction techniques. See, for decades they said, yeah, it appears as quantized, but it must be some mathematical error, it must be some mismeasurement, it must be some anomalous thing. It can't be that the universe is structured that way because the Big Bang doesn't predict it, and it seems to put us at the center and we're not supposed to be special. But after looking at all these alleged excuses for explaining it away, they found none of them can hold up. So Dr. Russell Humphreys points out, perhaps because of this clarity, or because of the confirming studies by other astronomers, critics seem to have stopped questioning the validity of the data. It appears that redshift quantization, the phenomenon itself, not the theories trying to explain it, has survived a quarter century of peer review. So now they're saying, okay, none of the excuses work. It appears quantization is real. Now maybe someday we'll figure out why. Ignoring the most obvious, straightforward implication that we really are surrounded by concentric, spherical shells of galaxies with our galaxy at the center. A very unique design and putting us in a very special place, which they do not want to acknowledge. Now in this book, The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time, written by Stephen Hawking, the co-author is a very eminent cosmologist, George Ellis. Now you have to be eminent to be allowed the privilege to co-author any book with a giant like Stephen Hawking. But notice this next quote is perhaps the most significant quote in this whole presentation I'm doing today. It shows exactly where they're coming from, exactly what science is and what it isn't, and what is the motivation behind what they do in regard to this evidence. World-class cosmologist, co-author with Stephen Hawking, what did George Ellis said? He said, for instance, I can construct you a spherically symmetrical universe with Earth at its center. Stop right there. That is the biblical cosmology. That's what's described in Genesis. The waters above, the waters below, central universe, Earth at the center. He says you cannot disprove it based on observations. That's another way of saying you can't disprove it by science, because science is all about observing and documenting. So he says you can't disprove it by science. He says you can only exclude it on philosophical grounds. Preconceived ideas like materialism is the whole of reality. He says, in my view, there is absolutely nothing wrong in that. Of course, he's obviously got a little philosophical bias himself. But at least he honestly admits, what I want to bring into the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria, not scientific criteria, in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that. So if Humphrey's model is just a model, but it is based on the idea of the Earth being at the center, massive spherical universe with enough mass to produce enormous time dilation at the center of the universe at the beginning on day 4, and then that shrinking and disappearing as the universe stretches out. He's saying we can't disprove that biblical cosmology by science, but philosophically we reject it. Because after all, we wrote the rule book and it says materialism is the whole of reality. No divine foot in the door. Well, at least he's honest about it. I wish we'd have more quotes like this in our textbook. Oh yes, by the way, everything we've told you is our philosophical prejudice, bias, and bigotry. The fact is we can't prove it by observation, but if you want to get an A on the test, you better put what we say, you see. That's how they enforce it. So what we are seeing here, this is kind of stylized, but we see these distinct groupings of galaxies. Now this is two-dimensional, so it looks like a bullseye target. At the center of the bullseye, we have our Milky Way galaxy. But then you go out about 3 million light years, you get a distinct clustering of galaxies. You do have other stars and galaxies in between here, but you have these major clusterings at these discrete, predictable distances. That shows that we appear to be at the center. Now, the thing is, if you're at the center of the bullseye, all the rings are equal distant from the center. If you move the center of the bullseye off center, then it's closer to some rings and further from others. Only do you get the same distance all the way around if you're at or very near the center. That's the evidence we have, that we get these redshift numbers. They correspond in all directions, which would only work if we're at the center. You get off center, then it's different distances in different directions. For example, if we were to take our Milky Way galaxy and take it off center in any direction, three-dimensionally, any direction, just 2 million light years. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but on a cosmic scale, it's not that big. Nonetheless, it is enough to make us closer to some of these rings of galaxies up here and further from the ones at the bottom. Thus, the number distances will not correspond as being essentially the same in all directions. That only works if you're literally physically at the center of those rings. And that appears to be the observable evidence of quantization. Because we see the numbers corresponding, it indicates we're at the center and not off center. Now, in this computer simulation, we see that what we actually observe is a major clustering of galaxies at discrete steps, discrete quanta, discrete predictable redshift numbers. If we move our galaxy off from where it is right now in any direction, just 2 million light years, it would all blur together. We would not have this predictable step-by-step pattern. That's only physically possible if you are at the center. And that's why it's one of the strongest arguments that we are at the center of these rings and not somewhere else. Now, in addition to the quantized redshifts, we have another independent line of confirmation that the universe is expanding three-dimensionally from a central point, and that our galaxy and solar system is at or near that central point. Now, this is known as the Pioneer Anomaly, and under this title, Creation Cosmology's Solve Spacecraft Mystery, published by Dr. D. Russell Humphreys in the website of the Institute for Creation Research, icr.org. You can look it up under that title. I recommend you do, because he goes into a lot of time and discussion and pictures and analogies that I don't have time to go into today, but I'd recommend you read it. It's very good reading. He points out that if we have this balloon-type universe that the evolutionists believe in, that as Pioneer 10 and 11 and a couple other probes that have gone way out past our solar system, as they get to those far distances, there should not be anything that causes an apparent difference in their speed and trajectory. Dr. Humphreys says that with his model, it predicts that at that distance, the radar signals, radio signals, would have a distortion because the fabric of space-time is being stretched out from a true center in a three-dimensional universe, not a balloon-type universe, that at that distance, predictably, this thing would happen. It would not be an anomaly, it would be a predicted thing. They have had scores and scores, hundreds of papers over the years trying to explain this. Nobody can agree on it. That's why we keep getting papers over and over. Dr. Humphrey's model, he says, explains it outright, but it's rejected because, again, it shows our galaxy, our solar system, is at a unique place, and that the type of universe God has described, this would be a predictable phenomenon because of the stretching of space from our locality, but it doesn't work in their Big Bang balloon theory, and so it's still called by them an anomaly. We think it's a confirmation of the type of universe God describes in the Bible. A third additional independent line of evidence is coming from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey is the most ambitious astronomical survey ever undertaken, with more than 200 astronomers at 13 institutions around the world. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey, among other instruments, utilizes a very sensitive digital camera that can take pictures of the night sky in various colors to determine the position and brightness of millions of celestial objects in 1/4 of the entire sky. The camera is the largest ever built for astronomical purposes, and so far it has revealed a map of the universe as never before seen. Michael Blanton, one of the major writers for the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, says, "We have made the best three-dimensional map of the universe to date, mapping over 200,000 galaxies up to 2 billion light years away, over 6% of the sky." Well, what does it look like? Well, here's what it looks like. Sloan Digital Sky Survey. You'll notice the clusters of galaxies have a distinct arcing pattern. They're thicker here, not as thick there. Thicker here, not as thick there. A little thicker here, not as thick there. But there's an overarching pattern to them. It's also significant they appear to be thicker here, not as thick here. Big Bang postulates homogeneous throughout the universe on a large scale, looks the same. This contradicts what their basic theory says, but if these arcing clusters that we see here could continue 360 degrees, they would be circular concentric spheres, spherical shells of galaxies. Well, what happens to be at the apex here? Well, that happens to be where you are, our Milky Way galaxy. So this is not using quantized redshift numbers, this is using direct optical verification that there appears to be an arcing pattern to clusters of galaxies, and that they appear to have differences where they're thicker and thinner, arcing around in a circular pattern, just like the quantized redshift seem to indicate. Now, the creationists, this is fairly new data. The creationists haven't said a whole lot about it of late. Once they start realizing we're using this against them, just like we did with quantized redshifts, we'll maybe have decades of them saying, oh, it's an anomaly, it's a mathematical error, it's some weird thing, just like they did with the quantized redshifts, until finally they had to admit they're real. What don't they admit? They don't admit that the most straightforward interpretation is that we're in a special place. We're at the center of the mass of the universe. The structure of the universe is around us. We are the apple of God's eye, the center and the most important thing in this universe. So, according to Humphrey's model, with the expansion of the universe, when it expands sufficiently, there's so much less density of mass and thus less effective gravity at the center of the universe that our central galaxy here, the Milky Way, would not today have a very big time difference. He estimates there would only be 2% time difference. If we had a clock here in our galaxy and we compared it with a clock at the edge of the universe, they'd only be running about 2% slower here than out there. Whereas on day 4, because the universe was more compact and we had a much greater density and a much greater stretching of the fabric of space-time, then time would slow down either trillions of times or literally come to a stop. And then as the universe expanded, that timeless zone would shrink and shrink and shrink until it shrinks right down around our solar system and Earth. Now we need that. Of course, God has fine-tuned the universe. We're the most important place in the universe. So I think the timeless zone would have shrunk right down around our solar system and Earth, because God wanted us to see the stars in our own galaxy, some of which are tens of thousands of light years away, by the way, and could not be seen in 6,000 years. But by this shrinking zone of timelessness, with the expansion of the universe, God would put the whole universe on fast forward for our benefit, because we're that important. It's there for us to see, to tell time. It's there for us to declare the glory of God to us, and we have to be able to see it. That means clocks out at the edge of the universe during that time would be registering billions of years by the time the light got to the Earth. But since Earth was in a no time zone, it wouldn't have registered. You just have the very beginning of day 4, and then boom, the lights go on. Now, because the timeless zone has passed through Earth's vicinity of the universe, time starts running at pretty much normal time here too. But there's been plenty of time out there because of the differential, gravitational differential in the relative speed of time, that we'd be able to see the stars. However, Earth's clock on day 4 would only register, 4 days the starlight would be here. Finished on day 6, we would see the stars. Now, Einstein would say that what God wrote in tablets of stone, Exodus 20:11, for in 6 days, Earth standard time, God created the heavens, the earth, the sea, everything in them. On the 7th day he rested. Okay? God created the universe. By Earth's clock, it was all done. The light reached us. By Earth's clock, it all happened on day 4 because there was a differential in the relative speed of time. So Einstein said you can't ask the simple question, how much time has passed? You have to ask according to whose clock how much time has passed, because velocity and gravity can have an enormous impact on the relative speed of time. Now, how do we know that the Bible is written from Earth Standard Time perspective? It's really very simple. God defined time at the beginning when only the earth existed. He said the light was day, the dark was night, there was evening and morning, day 1, where? On earth. So the first delineation of time was in terms of the earth as the standard, its rotation, light and dark cycle on the earth. It was defined in times of the earth when only the earth existed. The sun, the moon, the stars wouldn't exist until day 4. God defined time biblically, exclusively in terms of the most important place in the universe, the earth, which was created first. So it's clear God's word is written from the perspective of Earth Standard Time and its clock, not clocks out there. By Earth's clock, all of that happened. The light reached in. How much time registered on Earth's clock? 4 days. Einstein would say, with that proviso, that we're going by how much time registered on Earth's clock, Exodus 20:11, absolutely scientifically correct. Nothing improper about it. Because by Earth's clock, all this other stuff happened in fast forward. It didn't take that much time on Earth, but all that other time happened out there relativistically much faster. So if we're going by Earth's clock, everything in heaven, earth, sea, everything completed in 6 days, and the starlight here, usually by day 4. Now some people have said, well, if for the first 3 days there was no sun, moon, and stars, how do we get light? There's evening and morning, day 1, day 2, day 3. How could that happen? Well, I think God on purpose insisted on being the source, the only source of light at the beginning. He put the sun, the moon, and the stars there later for that purpose. For the first 3 days, remember 3 is the number of the triune God. For the first 3 days, I think God purposely intended to be the only source of light on the earth. Many pagan cultures have worshiped the host of heaven, the sun, the moon, and the stars, as gods. But if they read the true account given to Moses, they'd say, oh, how foolish. The source of light from the beginning was God. He said, let there be light. It came from him. It didn't come from the sun, the moon, and the stars. They weren't even there till the 4th day. God is the creator. God is the source of light and life. He is to be worshiped. And for the first 3 days, he emphasized his primacy by being the only source of light on the earth. If the earth is rotating, you have light emanating from one direction. You have an evening, morning, light, dark cycle. That's all it takes to have literal earth rotation days. On the 4th day, God puts the sun, the moon, and the stars there. And by Earth's clock, it appeared almost instantly. It'd been a timeless zone, but we wouldn't know time was passing. All this light is coming in over billions of years, and then boom, it goes on day 4. But by Earth's clock, it's early on day 4. It's all there for us. So, the sun, the moon, and the stars there now give light on the earth. But at the end of the age, when God retakes his rightful position as king of the earth, the Bible tells us it's going to go back to how it was at the beginning. It tells us here that the city, the New Jerusalem, had no need of the sun, neither of the moon. Why? Same reason the earth had no need of sun or moon for the first 3 days. To shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. There was no need for it at the beginning, sun or moon, because God was the source of light. At the end of the age in the new earth, New Jerusalem, God will retake, Christ in particular, his rightful place as the only necessary source of light. We will not again need the light of the sun or the moon. He is, after all, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And as he was the only necessary source of light at the beginning, so he shall be for all eternity in the new earth at the end. So the thing to remember again, the number one thing that Dr. Humphreys emphasizes and that I will emphasize, whenever somebody says we can't see the stars, there are billions of light ways, you ask, whose clock are you measuring by? Because clocks and time itself can run at drastically different speeds if the structure of the universe is correct. Can you prove this Big Bang balloon universe? No, it's a philosophical assumption. Even George Ellis said, we can't disprove the biblical view of Earth at the center of a spherical universe by observation. So I said, if we take God at his word, this falls right out of Einstein's equations. By Earth's clock, Exodus 20:11 literally happened. It was all done, the light getting here, everything, by Earth's clock in just 4 days. It's not science fiction. If we take God at his word, it falls right out of Einstein's equations, and they may disagree with it. As George Ellis said, we reject it for philosophical reasons, but that's a far cry from proving it's wrong scientifically. They simply have a philosophical objection. They do not have a real scientific disproof that God's word could be literally true based on this known aspect of time dilation by gravity as it would manifest in the universe the way God reveals it was created at the beginning. Finally here, we have this pale blue dot in between these two lines. I don't know if you can see it very well. It's a tiny little pale blue dot. In fact, this is the Earth, taken as a photograph from the Voyager space probe when it was going out at the outskirts of our solar system. They radioed it, turn around, take a picture of the solar system, and they caught the Earth here in this narrow beam of sunlight. Now, that inspired Carl Sagan. He wrote a book about it called The Pale Blue Dot. And when he was on his deathbed, dying with cancer, they rushed in the media, oh, we got to get one last final pearl of wisdom from this great scientist before he passes on. And they asked him, Dr. Sagan, tell us in all your scientific career, what's the single most important, profound truth that you have ascertained in your entire scientific career? And what he said was tragic and pathetic in the extreme. He said, the most important truth I have learned is that we live on this tiny little pale blue dot, this speck, and we orbit around just an average humdrum star that's not special at all, and we're in an average lackluster galaxy amongst billions of other galaxies, and we're just a tiny little speck out here, and we have no significance at all. That was his most profound truth. He reiterated that in this book, The Pale Blue Dot. He said, our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. It is up to us. We're tiny, we're a speck, we're insignificant, we're all alone, and there's no one to help us but ourselves. What a philosophy of doom and gloom and despair and worthlessness and hopelessness. The fact is, Carl Sagan, like his other materialist cronies, deliberately ignore the evidence of the fine-tuning of the universe, which shows the universe appears to have been designed with man in mind, what's called the anthropic principle. Anthropos in the Greek, man. The anthropic principle is the universe appears to have been fine-tuned and designed for large human beings with big brains to even exist in this universe. You just tweak or change the constants of chemistry and physics and nature in the tiniest way, you and I could not exist in this universe. It appears it was custom made for us. That means we're not just some worthless little speck out here. In addition to that, for decades, they have known about the quantized redshifts. Certainly long before Carl Sagan passed away, he knew about it. But like the rest of them, they said, yeah, it's there, but who knows what it means? Would not listen to the obvious implications that we're at the center of the universe. But the most important indication that our little pale blue dot is not an insignificant speck is what the Creator himself has said about it, always emphasizing in his revealed word the primacy of this real estate as the most important place in the universe. What did God make first before the sun, moon, the stars, or anything else in the universe? That pale blue dot, my friends, the first thing ever created. God took the soil of that pale blue dot and formed it in the image of man and breathed into him the breath of life, made him in his image. Here, on this pale blue dot, nowhere else. When that man, on this little insignificant dot, sinned, Romans 8 says the whole creation was put under a bondage of corruption and decay. It affected the whole universe because that little dot and what happened on it by man made in God's image was that important. And because we're made in his image, destined to be the children of the Father and the spiritual bride of Jesus Christ, God had invested too much in us. He gave us intrinsic, infinite value, made in his image. And therefore, when Adam sinned and the whole race fell, God promised the seed of the woman will come, crush the head of the serpent. The Creator humbled himself, stepped out of time and eternity of heaven, comes down to where? Nowhere else in the universe. Comes down to this little pale blue dot. Walks the soil of this supposedly obscure speck, dies here, sheds his blood, his precious, royal, divine blood. Nowhere else in the universe, it's soaked into the soil of this real estate, most important place in the universe. And it says he died once for all. He will never die again. And where did the creator of the universe choose to do that once for all act of supreme wisdom and love and kindness and grace and justice? Here, nowhere else. Why here? It's the most important place in the universe. He was buried in the heart of this earth, nowhere else, for 3 days, rose from the dead, ascended into heaven. But what does the scripture say? He's coming back. And when he comes back, he's not going to some other planet out there. He's coming here to the center of the universe. He's going to plant his feet on the Mount of Olives, and he will rule on David's throne for 1,000 years. Then he'll renew the heavens and the earth. And guess what happens? Heaven comes down out of heaven to the earth. What does the scripture say? The heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, comes down out of heaven. Where does it come to? Some other galaxy, some other planet? No, it comes down to the renewed earth. And the scripture says, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he shall dwell with them and be their God, and we shall dwell with him and be his people for eternity. And when heaven comes down, it doesn't come down anywhere else in the universe. It comes down to that supposedly obscure speck, that pale blue dot. It comes to the most important place in the universe, the center of the universe, the apple of God's eye, for the most important creatures in the universe. All of this is emphasized both by the fine-tuning of the universe, the centrality of our position, and most of all, by God's revelation. We are not some obscure little speck. We're the most important real estate in the universe. God has made it the most special place, and we are the most important creatures, a far cry from the philosophy of Carl Sagan and others, that we're just, some insignificant speck here by chance, have no purpose, no meaning. When we die, that's the end of us. Nobody will ever remember we ever existed, including us once we're dead and extinct. So have a nice day. No, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's value. We have infinite value. We live at the center of the universe, the most important place. God put the whole universe on fast forward for our benefit so we could see his big universe. And this is where everything significant in the history of the universe happens. Here, nowhere else, because we're not insignificant. The structure of the universe, the revealed word of God agrees with that. Carl Sagan and their ilk may not agree, but thank God, the evidence is against them, and it is for our God and his word. That's the good news. Well, that's the end of our presentation. I hope I haven't taken too much time, and we'll go ahead and...
Yeah, well, thank you. That was wonderful and very helpful to me personally, because astronomy is not my area, and I learned a great deal. I need to go back and read Dr. Humphrey's material again, I say too. I noticed by the clock over there, we finished about 3 minutes ago, but I look at this clock and we're just right on time. We're just finishing right now, so there's something to what you say. I just mentioned one thing. I talked to Dr. Larry Vardaman. Some of you know him. He's with Institute for Creation Research. He's an atmospheric physicist. But when Carl Sagan was ill, he developed a friendship with him. I don't know if you had heard that. There was Larry Vardaman went to a meeting where Carl Sagan spoke, and somehow they connected and got talking, and they had a period of correspondence over, I believe, a few months prior to Dr. Sagan's death. And Larry Vardaman tried to, share the gospel with him, and they had a dialogue on the scientific issues and so forth. But as far as I would know, it made no difference. But at least Dr. Sagan was thinking about things like this. He knew his demise was coming soon, and he knew he was ill and dying. And he did have some concerns enough to correspond with Dr. Vardaman. So, anyways. We can have question and answer. Do you want to do it back there or up here? We will, if you have questions, go back to Dr. Kindle's book table and so forth, and then we have Howard has something else to tell us here.
Great talk. To gain from it, awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.